We're looking at slide 16 in the chapter 11 PowerPoint, and this is where the chapter kind of transitions a little bit. The first half of the chapter was talking about multimedia. Second half of the chapter talks about a lot of miscellaneous higher end HTML5 features and plugins and things like that. So I'm going to kind of go through this in a somewhat brief fashion. This is by no way an intent, a way to cover all this stuff in depth, just to kind of introduce you to it. And as I've said in the previous videos, many of these topics are things you're going to learn in depth in other courses. Some of them even in this course. But let's start here. Okay, so the first thing that they're talking about is CSS drop-down menus. Now this is a technique that you see on a lot of websites where you go and you hover over a menu and something pops down. And that can be done with CSS. However, it is a very tricky thing to do if you've never done it before. There's a lot of considerations you have to make. So for example, if I was like to trigger a menu like this, I have to write code that reacts to me hovering over a list item in an unordered list. And then when I hover, things that were told to display none, basically all these items, will now display. And then they have to also behave in the right way. So a lot of it is how you structure it. And I'm not going to do that here, obviously, because I could spend a whole class, like a 4-hour session, to teach you guys how to just do this, and you guys would probably still be struggling with it a little bit because it is a very challenging thing to do. The book does have some code that demonstrates this, and there's entire websites dedicated to how to do it. We will, at some point, work through the CSS and how this works, but it won't be this week, just so you guys are aware. Basically, the trick comes in how you structure stuff and how you use your CSS. There's also this higher end CSS thing. Those of you that are taking Web 2, we go through this stuff. Those of you that are working in other classes, like when we do graphics programming with dynamic elements, that's a third semester course, we do some of this stuff. But basically we can take a property, a CSS property called transform, and we can take any object on the screen and rotate it. So this is actually a regular image. It's not something we put into Photoshop and turned. We're doing it through the code. It's pretty cool. You can create some interesting effects. Very simple little thing. If I would set it to 90 degrees, it would be sideways, right? There's also the transition effect. The transition effect is one that you probably see more often than you know, but you can set up these effects where, for example, in this example, they're saying when we're hovering over a link in the navigation, we are going to be triggering a transition in background color. So when I hover over that link, the background changes over the course of 2 seconds. So it's going to change from whatever color it is to something else. And we can set, so we would get like a 1001, 1002 fade in. Subtlety, really, but it's actually kind of a neat thing. And that's kind of a new thing in CSS3. It's been around for a good 5 years or so, but it's kind of a fun little property. The book also goes through creating an image gallery that looks like this. It's part of one of the case studies that you're doing. So it's kind of a fun little exercise as well. I'm not going to demonstrate it here. You guys can do that on your own because you have to. So you'll learn how to operate it. So follow the coding directions. But basically the effect that's going to be created here is you're going to have a little repository of small images, and then when you hover on them, it'll appear large over here. All right. Next thing that we're going to talk about is Java. What is Java? You pour it into a cup? No. It's a programming language. It's probably arguably one of the most popular and important programming languages. That is one that you will learn in the web development program. You'll get 2 courses, 2 3-credit courses in Java development. You'll do everything from real primitive command line programming all the way up to GUI and web programming. And it's a pretty important language to know in general, because once you learn Java, you kind of open the doors to just about every other language that fits into what we call C-style languages. And it's one of the original object-oriented programming languages. And you'll learn about that when you get to programming classes as well. The one thing that's really important is that Java is not JavaScript. We will be learning some JavaScript in this course, and that's really kind of where they're leading us right now. But very much the same way that we would take like audio and video files and kind of embed them into an audio, into a web page, you can also do the same thing with Java programs. Java has plugins that you can add to a browser, and then within that space that you create with the plugin, you can run any Java program. However, highly insecure, and most browsers now either don't allow it or don't natively support the regular Java plugins anymore. It used to be kind of a popular way to deliver certain types of content, and especially in the form of what we call applets. But this is not a technique that you will really employ. When we teach our Java classes, we now skip over applets. We talk about them and say, don't do it. And we move on to more modern techniques that don't require us to use the virtual machine that's inside of Java running on your operating system. We now do the work on the server. The server runs the code and generates HTML that you see. So this approach, for all intents and purposes, is not one that you're going to learn. They'll show you how to do it. Notice the object tag shown there at the top, very antiquated and not recommended. The thing that you will learn, though, and I'm going to argue that JavaScript is probably one of the most important languages you're going to learn. HTML provides you structure and content. CSS styles things. JavaScript makes it do something. What is a web page that does not do anything, right? JavaScript, I've heard, is the glue that holds the internet together. It's also a tool now that has become so popular that we use it to write full-blown applications, even within operating systems. So, for example, like anything that you might pull out of the Windows Store, for example, a large amount of those things are created with JavaScript. All right. Now, JavaScript is interesting because every browser supports it. It's platform neutral. It doesn't care what platform it's on. It doesn't care what browser it's in. Any browser that's HTML5 compliant, you can expect pretty much the same exact results from JavaScript. And notice JavaScript is not Java. But basically what JavaScript allows us to do is take any of the objects that we have on the page that are named with either a tag, an ID, a class, or a name, and allows us to control those objects in just about any fashion you can imagine, including the contents of the object, the style of the object, whether the object is there or not. We can create objects, we can move objects, we can style. I mean, it's crazy the stuff that you can do with it. So it's almost kind of only limited by your imagination in a sense. So things that we do with JavaScript, we display pop-up boxes. We can do like animated navigation, like that drop-down CSS menu. The old way we used to do it was with JavaScript. So you can still do it that way. Validate forms, create windows, image rollover, status messages, etc. Kind of like basically you're writing computer programs, but they happen within the browser. The other neat thing about using JavaScript is that unlike the server-side scripting that we were talking about earlier with forms, JavaScript operates in your browser. Does not require a server, it just works. So that's one of the reasons it's really popular as well. Anyway, Java requires what we call the document object model. We will be talking about this formally towards the end of the course, last couple weeks. And basically what that refers to is that we take the entire structure of the browser, the page, and all of its content, and we break it down into a hierarchy. So you can see at the very top there's a window, then on the far left side there's a document. That's the web pages that we're creating. But there's also the history and location and navigator. But the document is what we're concerned with, all the stuff within it. So any element that's on the page falls under the document object model in a hierarchy. So for example, there's the window, there's the document. Inside the document, the visible part of the page would be the body. Inside the body there might be a div that's a wrapper. Inside the wrapper there's a paragraph. inside the paragraph there's contents. Any one of those items can be manipulated with JavaScript. And it's all possible because of what we call the DOM. So that's something you're going to get to know, is the DOM and what it means and what it does. Well, in this course we get a little brief introduction to it at the very tail end. Depending on the program path you're taking, the web development students will learn, they'll get a course called Dynamic Elements. That is a JavaScript only course. It's a 2-credit course. Then you get graphics programming with something like, it's called something like that, graphics program with dynamic elements. That's a 3-credit course. That's JavaScript and jQuery. And then PHP has it in there, ASP.NET has it in there, and basically anything that you're going to do web-wise after this course is going to have JavaScript in it. Now the SharePoint people, you'll have a different path that you follow, but you learn about it pretty extensively in the Web 2 class. All right, so let's go back to the material here. Another thing that's kind of cool with JavaScript is we have this thing called AJAX, and the acronym stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And really what AJAX does is it leverages kind of the capabilities of using server-side stuff and blends it with client-side stuff. So in other words, we can load a web page, and then we can do stuff on the web page, have the page contents redraw, pull information from the server, and not have to redraw the page. That's a pretty big thing. And if you think of like when you go to like do your Gmail and your message list comes up and you click on a message, watch the page. The only thing that changes is the center section of the page. The page is not redraw. We clicked on something, goes to the server, it pulls in that message and loads it into that area of the screen. That's all possible by AJAX. They have an example here. I haven't opened this. Okay, well that's not very useful, is it? So we can take it to a browser and see what it does. Oh, this is the example? Okay, well. The page builder uses AJAX technologies to listen as you type and display a list of suggested CSS property names. So that's sort of like interactive, immediate interaction. So what it's doing on the fly is as I'm typing something, it's going to some repository and pulling back the information that matches what I'm doing. Very much like when you type in a search window and it kind of auto does stuff. Yeah, that's made possible by AJAX. It's another technology we'll learn about down the line. Then we have stuff like this, jQuery, which is a library of JavaScript functions which allows us to perform very high-level functions with very little code. And that's another one of these tools that's super, super popular. You know, if you only learn one JavaScript library, this is the one. And I am assuming that he's got some examples here as well, except this link will probably work. All right. So this is done with jQuery. I'm sure he probably provides the plugins and the code for it. And there's all sorts of things you can do with jQuery that are super powerful. A lot of them are visual in nature. You know, so many things. You know, I wouldn't even begin to talk about them right now. But it's a JavaScript library, provides a simplistic syntax for doing pretty advanced techniques. HTML5, one of the things that's really cool about it is it has a significant number of APIs that have been added to the standard as part of the protocol. So in other words, HTML5 has available to it some of these really popular things. Geolocation. You ever wonder how, like you bring up like something on your phone, for example, and it can recognize where you are and plot you on a map. Or go to a website and it says this website wants to know your location. It finds your location and can do stuff with that location. So geolocation is one of them. Web storage provides a means for us to actually store information on client computers. That's an API. It also allows us to create offline web applications. In other words, we create websites that are basically bundled as an application and don't require a server to run. Remember when I said a lot of the stuff in the Windows Store is really like JavaScript based? That's an example of an offline application. And then we have this thing called Canvas, which is a really huge step forward too. It creates a little, basically an area within a browser window that allows you to do some really advanced coding techniques, kind of to simulate what we used to do with Flash. And it's got its own language and conventions that work within the environment. That is a higher end feature too that we address in subsequent courses. And they kind of go through here and talk about exactly these things. I think this demo here, if I remember right, is a pretty cool one. Oh, it doesn't work anymore. Okay. This one was pretty cool because you'd run this, and basically what it would do, it would locate you on a map. And the thing about it that was really scary is it would find you in Racine, on campus, in this building, in approximately the right location. Some pretty scary stuff. It's actually not there. Yeah, you do have to allow, yeah, it must be enabled in the browser, absolutely. All right. If you guys want to play with some of those geolocation things, maybe he's got one that works. I think it's kind of cool when you see it in action. Cannot locate user. Okay, that's helpful. I'm just trying to see if there's... it works best in a browser other than Google Chrome. All right, Firefox to the rescue. There we go. Okay. So you guys know where we are on campus? No. Not quite. Well, no, actually that's pretty accurate, isn't it? That's the Lake Building, all right. And that's about where we are in the Lake Building, second floor. Big brother is watching, folks. Or sister, big sister. All right, we talked about web storage. This is a brand new thing. This is pretty important for a lot of different reasons. Mostly because you can now store more than what you could put in a cookie, which is just little bits of text. Now you can actually have databases and pretty large files stored on a user's machine. It's not always necessary, but it really kind of enables a lot of functionality that was not possible in the past, especially when you're working with offline applications. That's an important one to know. Offline web apps, they have demos here. Once again, I'll let you guys explore those. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about Canvas and kind of show you, some really basic syntax that goes with it. Basically what you do is you set up a Canvas element on the screen, and then you write JavaScript code and other techniques you can throw in there as well that basically render objects, moves things, create behaviors. Pretty neat little advancement. All right, folks, that wraps it up for tonight. I thought it would take 10 minutes, took 20. All right, still have a little time left over. All right, we'll see you in the next video.